Do you remember the smell that hit you when you walked through that door after church? Before you even got your coat off, before you said a word to anybody, that smell had already told you everything was going to be all right. Somebody had been up since 6 in the morning. The pot was already going, and Sunday dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a promise, it was proof. And I want to take you back there today because somewhere along the way we stopped making that promise. And I think we need to remember why it mattered. So pull up a chair. Let me tell you about 25 Sunday dinners after church that nobody cooks anymore. And by the time we're done, you might just have to call somebody you love. Number one, smothered pork chops, not the thin little things you see wrapped in plastic at the grocery store today. I'm talking about thick cut pork chops, bone in, dredged in seasoned flour and laid down in a cast iron skillet with a sound like the whole kitchen exhaled. You let them brown, really brown both sides, and then you pulled them out and built a gravy right there in that same pan, same drippings, same seasoning, a little onion, a little milk or broth, depending on what you had. You laid those chops back down in that gravy, put a lid on it, and let it go low and slow for the better part of an hour. By the time the family came home from church, the gravy had thickened and turned the color of a November afternoon, and those chops had given themselves over completely to it. You served them over white rice, not brown rice, white rice with a spoon that dragged that gravy through every grain. Number two, neck bones and potatoes. Now, some of you know exactly what I'm about to say, and some of you might not have grown up with this one, but hear me out. Neck bones were the cut nobody else wanted. That's why they were cheap, sometimes 20 cents a pound, sometimes less. But the people who knew, they knew that those bones had more flavor locked inside them than any expensive piece of meat you could put in a pot. You seasoned them the night before. Salt, pepper, garlic, maybe a little cayenne. In the morning before church, you put them in a heavy pot with water and you let them start. By the time you walked back through the door in your Sunday clothes, the whole house smelled like something holy. You added potatoes, big chunks, nothing fancy, and let them cook down until they were falling apart in that broth. You ate it in a bowl with cornbread on the side, and you didn't waste a drop. Number three, fried chicken. I know you know this one. But let me tell you what we don't do anymore. We don't start on Saturday. That's what's been lost. You cleaned that chicken on Saturday, and I mean cleaned it the way your grandmother taught you with cold water and vinegar, and then you soaked it overnight in buttermilk with salt and hot sauce and whatever else your family put in there. Every family had their own thing. Some put onion powder and a little paprika, some added a pinch of sugar to the flour. You didn't write it down. You watched until you knew Sunday morning before church. You pulled it out of that buttermilk, let it drain, pressed it into the seasoned flour, and then you set it aside. When you got home, the oil went on. You fried in lard if you had it, in Crisco if you didn't, and you stood at that stove and you did not walk away. Golden, crisp, seasoned all the way through, not from a bucket, not from a bag, from your hands. Number four, Sunday pot roast. This was the one that cooked while you worshiped. Chuck roast, because that was the cut that rewarded patience. You seared it on all sides in a little oil until it had a dark, beautiful crust, and then you put it in the oven, 250 degrees, sometimes lower, with carrots, onions, celery, potatoes, and a cup of beef broth. You covered it tight. You went to church. You sang. You prayed. You greeted your neighbors. And when you came home, the roast had done exactly what slow heat and time asked it to do. It had surrendered. You could pull it apart with two forks, and the vegetables had absorbed every bit of that flavor. The whole house greeted you at the door like it had been waiting. Number five, ham hocks and butter beans. Butter beans, not lima beans from a can. Dried butter beans soaked overnight in a bowl of cold water on the counter. In the morning you drained them, covered them with fresh water, dropped in those ham hocks, smoked, heavy, full of promise, and you let it cook, slow. The beans swelled and softened, and the broth turned silky from the collagen in those hocks. You seasoned with salt only after the beans were tender, because salt before that made them tough, and your grandmother told you that, and she was right. You served it over rice or with a piece of cornbread, and it fed everybody at that table, sometimes 6 people, sometimes 8, on almost nothing. Number 6, oxtails. Oxtails cost almost nothing once upon a time. They were the forgotten part, the tail, and butchers would practically give them away. A woman who knew how to cook them could take 2 pounds of oxtails and make something that would bring a grown man to tears. You browned them in batches, don't crowd the pan. Your grandmother always said that, and then you built a braise around them. Onions, garlic, tomato paste, thyme, allspice if your family was from the islands, or just black pepper and bay leaf if you weren't. Low heat hours. The collagen in those bones turned the braising liquid into something so thick and rich, it coated the back of a spoon. You served them over rice, and the gravy ran into every crevice. That was Sunday, number 7. Macaroni and cheese baked, not the box. Never the box on Sunday. You boiled the elbows until they were just barely tender because they were going back in the oven and they would keep cooking, and you made a custard. Eggs, evaporated milk, butter, salt, and 3 kinds of cheese, if you could manage it. Sharp cheddar, always. Some families added Velveeta for the melt. Some added a little mustard powder that you couldn't quite name but you could taste. You poured it all together in a baking dish, topped it with more cheese, sometimes breadcrumbs, and baked it until the top was cracked and golden, and the inside had set up like a dream. You cut it in squares. It held its shape. It was not a side dish. It was a statement. Number 8, candied yams. Sweet potatoes peeled and sliced, layered in a pan with butter, brown sugar, a little cinnamon, a little nutmeg, sometimes a splash of vanilla, sometimes a little orange juice. You didn't need marshmallows, though some families used them, and God bless them for it. You cooked them until the syrup they made all on their own was thick and bubbling, and the edges of the yams had gone a little caramelized and dark. The smell of that pan coming out of the oven was like the whole season of autumn at once. Number 9, collard greens. You started with the stems. You stripped every leaf by hand, pulled the leaf away from the stem in one motion, folded and stacked and rolled and sliced. Some people put their pot liquor in first. Some put their smoked meat in first. Ham hocks, smoked turkey necks, fatback, whatever you had. You let the meat go first to build that pot liquor, that dark, smoky, deeply savory broth. And then you added those greens in batches because they filled the pot before they cooked down. Salt, a little sugar to cut the bitterness. Some people added red pepper flakes or a whole pot of dried pepper. Low heat, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 3. And when they were done, they were dark and silky, and they had absorbed everything that pot had to give. You ate them with the pot liquor. That was the medicine. Number 10, cornbread, real cornbread, in a cast iron skillet that was already hot from the oven, already greased with a good tablespoon of lard or bacon fat, so when the batter hit it, it sizzled. No sugar in some families, sugar in others. That was a line people drew. But what nobody argued about was that you needed that hot skillet so the bottom crust formed right away, dark and crisp, while the top stayed tender and just barely golden. You cut it in wedges. You ate it with the greens. You soaked up the pot liquor. You didn't waste a drop, and you didn't leave a crumb. Number 11, chitlins. Now I know not everyone is ready for this one, but I'm going to say it with the respect it deserves. Chitterlings were the part of the hog that cost almost nothing and required everything from the cook. Hours of cleaning, a smell during cooking that cleared the room of the faint of heart. But the families who made them knew something that can't be taught quickly. When they were done right, cleaned properly, seasoned well, cooked long and slow, they were tender and rich and deeply, deeply flavored. You ate them with hot sauce and vinegar and a piece of cornbread. And it was not a lesser meal. It was a meal that said, we use all of it. We waste nothing. We honor what we have. Number 12, pig's feet, tagged at the butcher for 49 cents a pound. Pickled or braised, vinegary and sticky and fall off the bone tender. You ate them with your hands, and you didn't apologize for it. There was a whole generation that understood the value of the forgotten cuts, and this was one of them. Number 13, chicken and dumplings. A whole chicken simmered in a big pot with celery and onion and carrot until the meat fell off the bone. You pulled it out, pulled the meat off, discarded the skin and bones, and put the meat back in that golden broth. Then you made the dumplings, just flour, a little baking powder, salt, butter, and milk, dropped by spoonfuls right into that simmering broth. You put the lid on, and you did not lift it for 15 minutes. When you did, those dumplings had puffed up soft and pillowy, and the broth had thickened all around them. It was not fancy, it was exactly right. Number 14, liver and onions. Before you shake your head, remember that there was a whole generation that ate liver every single week because it was one of the cheapest proteins at the butcher, and it put iron in your blood when you couldn't afford to be tired. Calf's liver, sliced thin, soaked in milk to draw out the bitterness, dredged in seasoned flour, cooked fast in butter in a hot pan, and laid over a pile of slow-cooked onions that had gone golden and sweet, served with mashed potatoes. The liver of your memory and the liver done right are two different things. Number 15, salmon croquettes. Canned salmon, the kind with the bones still in, because you mashed those soft bones right into the mixture and nobody was the worse for it. You mixed it with egg, a little flour, diced onion, salt and pepper, formed them into patties and fried them until crisp on both sides. Sunday morning breakfast before church, or sometimes Sunday supper when you needed something quick and good. Served with white rice and a can of cream corn, and you had a meal that filled everybody up and cost almost nothing. Number 16, black-eyed peas, dried, not canned, soaked overnight, cooked low and slow with a smoked ham hock and a dried hot pepper and onion. Sometimes eaten on Sunday, always eaten on New Year's Day for good luck. But during the year, they showed up on Sunday tables because they were cheap and good and nobody got tired of them the right way, over rice with hot sauce. With cornbread. They were never just a side dish. They were a whole philosophy. Number 17, fried catfish, cornmeal crusted, not flour. That is the line. Seasoned cornmeal with salt and pepper and a little garlic powder, fish dragged through it and fried in a cast iron pan or a deep fryer until golden and crackling on the outside and sweet and flaky on the inside. Served with hot sauce, with white bread, with coleslaw, with more cornbread. Sunday fish fries were a community event. Somebody always had a pot going in the backyard. Neighbors brought their own plates. Children ran between tables. The adults talked long after the food was gone. Number 18, stewed chicken. Not roasted, stewed, a whole chicken cut into pieces, and the backs and necks went in too because they had flavor. Browned first, then braised low and slow in a seasoned broth with tomatoes and onion and bell pepper. The chicken gave everything it had to that broth. You ate it over rice, and the sauce was thick and dark and tasted like it had been cooking since before you were born. Number 19, homemade pound cake. A pound of butter, a pound of sugar, a pound of flour, 6 eggs, and patience. You creamed that butter and sugar until your arm ached if you didn't have a mixer, and until the mixer ran warm if you did. You added those eggs one at a time. You sifted the flour. You flavored it with vanilla, sometimes lemon, sometimes both. Baked in a tube pan for an hour and 15 minutes. You tested it with a broom straw. You turned it out and it crackled at the top and was dense and moist inside, and it sat on that counter all day. And every time someone walked by, they cut a thin slice and pretended it was just a taste. Number 20, sweet potato pie, not pumpkin. Sweet potato baked until tender, scooped out, mashed with butter and sugar and eggs and evaporated milk and cinnamon and nutmeg and a little vanilla. Poured into a homemade crust in a deep dish pie plate, baked until set, cooled until room temperature, eaten at the table with no apology, and often no whipped cream because it did not need any help. This pie could make a room go quiet. Number 21, banana pudding, real banana pudding, cooked on the stove, a custard, milk, sugar, egg yolks, cornstarch, vanilla, stirred constantly until thick. Layered in a bowl with vanilla wafers and sliced bananas, and topped with a meringue made from those leftover egg whites beaten stiff with sugar, then browned under the broiler or in the oven just until the tips of the meringue went golden. It went into the icebox for a few hours. The wafers softened into the custard. The bananas perfumed the whole thing. You brought it to the table in the dish it was made in, and everybody got a good scoop. Number 22, tea cakes, not cookies. Tea cakes. Soft, dense, lightly sweet, flavored with vanilla and nutmeg, made with whatever fat was on hand. Lard, butter, sometimes a little of both, rolled out and cut with a glass or a biscuit cutter, baked until just set. They were the thing you ate with a glass of sweet tea when dinner was still an hour away and you needed something to hold you. They were simple and they were made by hand, and they were better than anything in any bakery. Number 23, rice pudding. Leftover cooked rice, and there was always leftover rice. Simmered in whole milk with sugar, a cinnamon stick, a little vanilla and raisins if you had them. Stirred slowly until the milk absorbed and the whole thing turned creamy and thick. Eaten warm on a Sunday evening when the big meal was behind you and the evening was long and quiet. It was the taste of not wasting anything, and it was the taste of peace. Number 24, bread pudding. The heel of bread nobody threw away. Day-old biscuits, stale cornbread, everything got torn up into a baking dish and covered with a custard of eggs and milk and sugar and vanilla and cinnamon and butter, sometimes a handful of raisins. You let it soak for 30 minutes and then baked it until it puffed and set, and the top had a sweet crackled crust. Some families made a whiskey sauce or a vanilla sauce to pour over. Some ate it plain. Either way, it was one of the greatest things ever made from what was almost nothing. And every cook who ever made it understood something deep about not wasting what you've been given. Number 25, homemade lemonade, not from a can, not from a powder. Lemons rolled on the counter with the heel of your hand before you cut them to release the juice, squeezed by hand into a pitcher. Sugar dissolved in just a little hot water first to make simple syrup so it didn't settle at the bottom. Cold water, ice if you had it, poured into whatever glasses were clean. It was the drink that sat on every Sunday table alongside the iced tea, and it was made by someone who could have bought a shortcut but didn't. And here's what I want to say before we close. Every single one of these dishes was born out of necessity. The Depression, segregation, the cuts of meat nobody else wanted, the canned goods, the dried beans, the stale bread. People cooked with almost nothing and turned it into a table full of something. They did it every week. They did it in faith, because Sunday dinner after church was not just about food. It was about telling everyone at that table that they mattered, that this day mattered, that this family, this moment, this meal was worth the time and the trouble. And somewhere along the way, we got busy. We got convenient. We got drive-throughs and delivery apps and meal kits. And I'm not here to judge any of that. But I do want to say we lost something. We lost the smell that greeted you at the door. We lost the sound of that cast iron on the stove. We lost the particular satisfaction of a meal that cost $4 and fed 6 people and tasted like love put in the work. Your grandmothers knew things about feeding people that no cookbook has ever fully captured. They knew that a neck bone simmered since 6 in the morning tells the people in that house they are worth 6 hours of somebody's care. They knew that a pound cake made from scratch says, I saved time for you. They knew that the heel of bread turned into bread pudding says nothing in this house goes to waste and nothing in this family goes unnoticed. So today, if you remember any of these dishes, if one of them brought back a kitchen, a face, a sound, a smell, hold on to that. Write it down if you can. Make it if you're able. Pass it on if there's someone to pass it to. Because that knowledge is not just a recipe, it is a record of who we were and how we loved each other. I'm Mama Lou. Thank you for sitting at this table with me today. I'll see you next time.